like to welcome you here this evening. It is very pleasing to see so many of Doris's and Jack's friends and family that are here with us. This is a celebration of life. I wanted to share a little story with you. I'm very sensitive to both Jack and Doris's position in our community. My wife was more involved in the community when we first moved here, and for several years I was known as Mr. Georgeline. And until the word leaked out what my real name was. And we all know Doris was wherever she was, and Jack was always right behind her, helping her any way he could. I'd like to thank the Dana Point Historical Society members and board of directors for helping put this event together, and the attendance that we're having here by city, county, and state officials, historical societies from San Juan, San Clemente, and Laguna Niguel, and also the commission, Historical Commission, or Orange County Historical Commission, and their representatives, which Doris was an active current member of that commission. The program will go as followed. Our invocation will be given by Dr. Tyler Guy, who's pastor of the South Shores Church. For the tribute for Doris, we have Elizabeth Mamatri. She was with Doris at the beginning of the Historical Society and has been a member of the community and knew Doris in the community. Lynn Harris Hicks is a family friend, longtime family friend, with her throughout her career and the awards that she had earned as a writer. And then her sons, Blair and Brent, will also have a few words to say. After that, we'll step off the stage, we'll dim the lights, and we'll be watching a 10-minute video, and I'll introduce that. And then following that, I'll introduce the rest of the program. So right now, we'll start with our invocation from Pastor Guy.
Would you stand with me, please, and let's begin. Dear God, we pause before you this evening, and we thank you for these two lives and how they were lived. We thank you for the difference that they made here in our community. We thank you for Doris. We thank you for Jack. And I pray that you will give their family courage and strength as they deal with these days and the days ahead. I pray that you will be here tonight among us in your own special way as we say thank you to all that they have done and how we are better as a community because they have been part of us. And we say goodbye with regret. They have been our friends. And so I pray that you will bless each of us here. May we be the ones now that are more intentional about making a positive difference in this place and around the world. And so please be with us here tonight, we pray in your name. Thank you. Amen.
A young man, Richard Henry Dana, sailed toward Capistrano Bay in 1835, writing what he saw of the land and ocean in a journal, later to be published as 2 years before the mast. 40-plus years later, this exquisite part of the coast was named Dana Point. Fast forward another 80 years, another young journalist and new mother, Doris Isaac Walker, came to Dana Point and stayed for the rest of her life. With the beauty of the entire California coastline and so far from her roots in Cleveland, Ohio, how fortunate are we that Doris made this particular spot her home. I met Doris through the Dana Point Civic Association almost 25 years ago. A small group of women, Doris, Sue Emery, Barbara Brown, and Mary Ellen Thomas, began to mull over the seeds of an historical society. Doris was our mentor and guide from the beginning. While Judy Henderson and myself wrestled with the intricacies of Articles of Incorporation and 501c3, Doris never let us forget the purpose of our mission. It was Doris who steered us to the American Title Company in Santa Ana to research and retrieve photographs to begin our collection. It was her ideas and contacts which led us to form the first programs we offered at the library. And it's a measure of how numerous her contacts were and how far her interests lay that she was our program chair for 23 years. At this time, Doris would invite me to her home, past citrus trees to her front door, decorated with bleached driftwood and seashells so lovingly displayed. I'd sit in her living room, and there began my education and ultimately a love of all things Orange County. I'm sure many of you in the room today have a copy of her book, Homeport for Romance, and I'm certain most of those copies have an inscription by the author. Like snowflakes, there are not two the same. Doris always found the words to personalize her books, making a simple book signing into poetry. Of her many books, one I think best reflects her is The Adventurer's Guide to Dana Point. Doris was an adventurer. She was very American, but intensely proud of her European ancestry. Her sheer enthusiasm for life was echoed every day in the stories she could weave about something she had researched or championed, like the Festival of Wales. So many stories and possibilities bubbling up like a fountain. Doris had a quaint way of weaving our stories into her life too. Barbara Johannes, also from Ohio, was addressed by Doris in emails as Buckeye Barb, and Doris called herself Buckeye Babe. Heidi Hyde's love of tailoring and Doris's search for notions caused them one day to meet in a fabric store. Doris afterwards called Heidi Buttons all the time after that. She often toted an extra purse, a bit like Mary Poppins' carpet bag, really, from which she would extract all kinds of treasures, some quirky, like the T-shirts for Judy and myself in outrageous colours Doris had chosen for us, or gifts reflecting her thoughtfulness and genuine kindness, like a children's book about firefighters destined for a museum. Doris's constant love of history coloured so many of our events. At the unveiling of the Hydroga statue, between amber and violet lanterns, we put out a table of refreshments and asked for contributions. Everyone else bought cheese and crackers or cookies. Doris bought a sailor's 1830s diet of hardtack and dried biscuits. But some local kids ate it anyway. In closing, I usually walk around the trails and paths of Dana Point around sunrise. But it seems to me in the past 3 weeks, a light has gone out around here. To Brent and Blair and Daisy, we cannot fathom the depth of your loss and know that this dear, intelligent, kind, generous friend and teacher will be missed every day. Thank you.
When I met Doris, she was a vivacious, early 20s, beautiful mother of 2 very intelligent, active little boys. And she confided in me that she really wanted very much to have an opportunity to do some writing and get out of the kitchen and the play yard for a little while. And I was at that time working on trying to build I shouldn't say trying to build the Sun, San Clemente Sun weekly into a daily. And so I was in the opposite position because I had 2 very intelligent and beautiful little girls that I wanted to have more time with. So I split our duties, and she began to write for what was then called the New Sun Post. And it was only a few articles before I realized what a gem we had. She had told me that she was a graduate of the Case Journalism School, Case University Journalism School, and she graduated with honors. And so I really expected a great deal from her, but I didn't have any idea what we had there. She had the ability to take a mundane assignment and turn it into a piece that had sparkle and human interest and all that sort of thing. And I was trying to think of a good example of that. And I think that one time somebody from the water department called the paper and wanted us to report on an achievement that they had made in the department, improvements of some kind. And so I gave it to Doris to do. And she went out with her little camera, and they weren't very little in those days, were they? But anyway, her camera. And she went to the water department. She came back wearing a hard hat, which they'd given her to protect her from the dangers of the mechanical parts that she was going into. And she wrote a story that was just delightful, just delightful. She was able to see the human interest angles to just about anything. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I realized that most of us know that she was an exceptional historian and writer, but I don't know how many people realized how versatile she was, because she not only was very impressed and dedicated to her beloved Dana Point and the harbor and the history of it all, but she was able to share with other people her feelings about the uniqueness of the beauty of the place we all were living. And most of us really enjoy living in this beautiful place. But I think that it's seldom that we realize that compared with all the rest of the world, that we have something here which is very precious. And she communicated that in her writings and in her speakings. She was a uniquely capable public speaker and was in great demand, not just in our area here, but other places too. And she was a teacher in the sense that what she was giving the people who were reading her books and listening to her speaking was a different concept, a wholly different concept of history. And I think that most everybody's had the experience of taking history class in school, and you find that it's mostly just the building up and reporting on the military conquerors and their wonderful excursions and what they did and so forth. And Doris, I don't think I ever remember Doris saying anything at all about any military conquerors in all the history that she talked about of California. And I don't think that she would have if there had been some, because she was focused on the beauty of history, of the total progression of the species and the people, and especially the people. And she didn't realize it, I think. I'm saying this now because I didn't have a chance to talk with her about it, but it was just recently that I realized that she was one of the founders of the women's movement. Now, would you think of that when I said about Doris Walker? Doris Isaac Walker was one of the founders of the women's movement for equity, gender equity, and reducing the violence against women and all those kinds of good things. And I say that because she was the first woman editor of her university newspaper, which was an old university, 50 years old. And she was the first woman editor. And then when she became a writer about history, she began to receive the plaudits other writers, all in other areas, who really would like to have had the same kind of honors that she was given. She had literally walls of certificates and letters of testimony and plaques of honors that she won. And we were figuring that it was probably more than 150 of them altogether at one point. And this is something that you just don't find. I mean, it's unique. That she would write something that was really beautiful and turn it into the press women, and it would go through their channels, and she'd come back with a first prize state, first prize national. Always had prizes every year. And 3 of our press women are here tonight from out of the area here because they want to express their respect and admiration for Doris. And they know what I'm saying when I say that she was just in a category or a status of her own, that she didn't have any competition. She didn't have any competition, really. And this isn't something that most people would know about. They enjoy the books and recognize her uniqueness. But when she became the official historian of Dana Point, and she was innovative enough to promote the whole town in her annual Wales parade, I think they called it. She was building up the whole area because people came from far distant places from her advertising of it, and would come to Dana Point, and then would return to Dana Point, and many of them began to build houses in Dana Point. And it grew so fast that the nuclear people had to stretch the 10-mile evacuation zone up to 11 and 12 miles, right where Dana Point was taking over all the fields. I think that her making those inroads. Oh, the one I wanted to tell you about was that we were in the age when men kind of deteriorated the prestige of the women who were around them, and didn't consider it proper that women were coming into the professions that they considered were for men. And she knew that the press club was a male establishment. And of course, since then, everything's changed, but she wanted to be in that press club. And she wrote a sports story. I don't know how she did it from the standpoint of her name, but she may have just used the initials instead of her Doris. But at any rate, she submitted her work, and she won their award for it. And that was part of her becoming a member of the press club. And this, to me, was one of the breaking the glass ceilings experiences of Doris Walker and making her name known and becoming very famous for all of us. So I want to say thank you to Doris for everything that she did. She was so dedicated. And I remember going with her to gather pictures. I think that her pictures should be going to an archive at the university because she has an amazing archive of pictures of the beauty of just the usual. For example, one trip we took was to find to get pictures of the old barns all over Southern California, and she managed to find a lot of them that were really beautiful, even though they were falling down old barns. And then we did one trip that was to get the lighthouses. She wanted to make a book about lighthouses. And we have several books that we've talked about that she really wanted to do, and so that's part of the tragedy of losing her. But she was so very proud of Dana Point and of people here. She just loved you all, I think, and very much proud of her Brent and see, I can't even remember. Brent and what's your name? Blair. Blair. I'm so old that I can't let things go from my memory. Brent and Blair, and of her granddaughter, Daisy. And she was doing all of this for them at the same time she was doing it for all of us in the area. Thank you.
That was very nice. The last two people that spoke were very, very dear friends of my mom, and a lot of you out there were very dear friends of my mom, and she really treasured her friendships with all of you. And I'd hear about a lot of you, and she'd brag about a lot of you, and I just want to say thanks, because that was a big part of her life, and it meant a lot to her. And wish she could look out there now and see everybody that are here. And I wanted to, I'll reveal a little secret about her. A lot of you have heard her speak before, and she actually didn't spend as much time preparing for her speeches as you would think if you saw her speak. It always surprised me. I said, "Mom, you just threw a bunch of slides together, and you haven't written anything down." And she goes, "I'll think of something." And it amazed me how fluid she always was when she spoke. And I think I could go on forever and tell you about times growing up and all the amazing times we had thanks to her, the things I got to experience. But yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read instead a letter from her friend from way back in Cleveland, Pat Benz, who has been a friend all her life. And she now lives in Washington and still drives her RV around different parts of the country. So she wrote this. She'd love to be here, but she couldn't be here today. I don't remember when I met Doris. I know it must have been when we were in the 7th grade at Wilbur Wright Junior High School in Cleveland, Ohio. But she's been so much a part of my life that I can't imagine a time when it was not so. We were fortunate, Doris and I. We were part of a group of 5 girls who were friends all through the teen years. We gave each other love and laughter and joy. And Doris gave me a special gift. She taught me to love baseball. I knew about baseball, of course, and about the Indians, the hopeless losers, but they weren't important in my life till Doris took me in the hand and taught me to love them and the game they played. For a few years, we built many hours of our lives around them. To say that as a team they weren't very good is to be kind. They were awful, but every year we believed it would happen. They would win it all. In 1948, they did. Could any 2 girls have been happier? Could any 2 girls have been more sure that it was their love and faith and cheering that had brought the pennant and World Series trophy home? Years have passed, but for me, the love of baseball has remained. How many gifts last a lifetime? The first shock and sorrow of her passing has given way to my firm belief that I will never lose Doris. She will always be a part of my life. And knowing Doris as I do, I feel sure she has given gifts to many of you, gifts that tragedy cannot take away. And Doris will remain part of your lives too. And it was nice. My mom let us be Angels and Dodgers fans. She was a real American League fan, so she picked the Angels. They were also closer. She didn't really like driving up to LA too much. We did, she did. And so she enjoyed in 2002 when the Angels won. But I was with her in 1997 in Game 7 of the Marlins versus the Indians. And I thought for sure the Indians were going to win that game. And Edgar Renteria's hit kind of blew it all, and I didn't expect my mom to cry as much as she did. It was terrible. I mean, she was really diehard about that. So luckily, and Jack, thanks to Jack, she really got into the Lakers, and she got to enjoy these championships with Kobe and Shaq and all of that. I'm so glad. And I'm so thankful to Jack for making her so happy these last 10 years and adventuring the world with her. And I'll turn it over to my brother now, Brent. Thanks.
Well, I wanted to read something from my mother's one sibling, her younger brother, Alan. And just before I read his reminiscence, I want to read just a short bio because it'll kind of set up what he's saying. But Alan Isaac received his PhD from Indiana University in 1966. His research interests focus on democratic theory, the nature of explanation, political science, the use of models in political analysis. The fifth edition of his Scope and Methods of Political Science was published in 1998, and he is currently working on a history of political theory text, and he is the author of Introduction to Politics. Dr. Isaac's teaching interests include political theory and philosophy and the philosophy of social science. He is currently working on a reference works on conservatism and liberalism. And also he taught for many years. He was a professor at Western Michigan University. Here's his reminiscence. Starts out, "For health reasons, my wife Liz and I can't be with you tonight to celebrate Doris's life, but I wanted to share a few memories. Even though Dana Point is 2,000 miles from Portage, Michigan, I have followed her career with pride. It is probably true that those of you who are here tonight can talk in more detail than I can about Doris's accomplishments and contributions over the last 4 decades. But only I can testify to what a wonderful sister she was. Doris was 7 years older, and so I alternated between being a dutiful brother, learning all I could from my bright and scholarly sibling, to being an irritating little pest. As I remember, she always handled the irritations with grace. In fact, she often used them as teachable moments. But I didn't always learn. We did many things together. We both loved to read, something I'm sure we picked up from our mother. From the time I began to read, Doris would take me to the neighborhood library, help me pick up books, and then after I read a book, we would discuss it, and she would try to answer my philosophical questions, such as, quote, "Why did the fox eat the gingerbread man after helping him across the river?" Unquote. But I think what brought us closest together was our mutual love for baseball in general and our hometown Cleveland Indians in particular. Like most other native Clevelanders, we were born with an emotional attachment to the Indians. This also meant that we were destined to spend much of our lives feeling frustrated and depressed. But there have been several glorious periods in the team's history, and most memorably was the 1948 season, the last time the Indians won the World Series. Doris was 15 and I was 8, and the excitement of the season cemented our relationship. In my eyes, she became the perfect sister. Once during a game, she caught a foul ball and had it autographed by several of our favorite players after the game and then gave it to me. I think, but I'm not absolutely sure, that from that time on I stopped irritating her, except when I had to tell her that several years later that I lost the precious ball in a sandlot game. And there's another ball. I think there's more than one ball because she had another ball that was autographed by all the 1948 Cleveland Indians. We attended many games with our mom and dad that year, including a World Series game, and Doris kept score of every one of them. The games that we didn't attend, she would score from radio broadcasts. I cherish Doris's incredibly detailed 1948 scorebook, but somewhere along the way it was lost. I'd love to have it back. It will not surprise any of you who have known Doris as an adult to discover that the teenage Doris's enthusiasm for and dedication to being an Indians fan were breathtaking. Despite her son's forgivable alliance to another major league team, she remained an Indians fan. In one of our last email conversations, we discussed the Indians' surprisingly successful 2011 season. We used to talk about the odds that we would live long enough to experience another Indians World Series victory. I guess it's up to me to achieve that goal for Doris. Both Doris and I attended Case Western Reserve University. She, of course, had graduated by the time I started in 1958, and I soon discovered that she had become a campus legend. More than one professor said, quote, "You must be Doris's brother," unquote. She had already become an accomplished writer and moved naturally into journalism. Without getting on the proverbial soapbox, she calmly furthered the cause of gender equality by becoming the first woman editor of her high school paper and then the first woman editor of Western Reserve's campus paper. Under Doris's leadership, both became award-winning publications. She went on to graduate school at Northwestern University and into the trade publication field with Walgreens and the Brunswick Corporation, and of course, eventually became Doris I. Walker Smith, celebrated author and historian of Dana Point. In 1964, several years after Doris and Jack Walker moved to California, my newly retired parents followed her and built a house in what was then El Toro. Liz and I visited a number of times over the years and got to see Dana Point in Orange County, ushered about by the area's most celebrated tour guide. And most importantly, we and our 3 children got to know Brent and Blair, 2 wonderful people who truly are their mother's sons. And all of you know, Doris liked to talk, and of course was very good at it. What she said was always interesting. Luckily, from an early age, I have been a good listener. I remember during one of our visits to California, in the midst of Doris's narrative about her latest historical discovery, one of the boys interjected from the sidelines, quote, "My mother never met a word she didn't like," unquote. And we were just talking with him on the phone, my brother and I, and neither one of us remembered which one it was, but one of us did a good quote. But I've often thought about the meaning of the profound insight. Did it mean that Doris was a student of language and a master use of words, or that she just liked to talk? I have come to the conclusion that both interpretations are true. I had the opportunity to meet Jack Smith only a couple of times, and he was obviously a wonderful man. Like Doris, he enjoyed talking, and we had many long conversations during which I learned a great deal about the construction industry and his beloved Marine Corps, which he served so well. Luckily, he was also a good listener. It makes me especially happy that the 2 of them got to travel together, something they both love so much. So while I miss my sister and still can't believe she's gone, there is solace in knowing that her legacy will live on through the books she wrote, the organizations she helped create, but most of all, through her loving family and her wonderful friends. Thanks and best wishes to everyone, Liz, Alan, and Bear, Doris and Jack's favorite Yorkie. And I just wanted to add to that, because since he talked about the reading when he was young, and the same thing happened with myself and then my brother, where she was reading to us when we were, maybe 3 or 4. So by the time we went into kindergarten or first grade, we were already got moved ahead in the reading, which was, because that was just something that she always did. And, we got to tag along where she was just fearless. And I remember as a kid, she'd get a report, oh, they're tearing down a cowboy bunkhouse from the 1800s to build a housing tract over in San Juan. We've got to go see it. So she's walking through fields, these tall fields up the hill, and we're like, Mom, I think there's rattlesnakes and things in here. But she was just gone. She showed us what fearlessness was. And then later on, I got an interest in early film history or early films, and it was really her that encouraged me that, you not only can watch these films, you can read about them, research them, and writing a book isn't beyond the scope. So and it was really her encouragement on that. So I think that same thing that touched Alan and touched my brother and myself and a lot of people about her was, I think, one of the best things she did was she was the best promotion agent for anybody, because I would just constantly hear, this person, that person. She would just rave about everything they did, and then you meet them and it's like, oh, I know all about you because my mom has, already just verbally written your history, or in some cases, like a few people here tonight that she wrote their history on paper as well. So I just want to thank, from my brother and myself, everybody for coming, and I want to thank, as he mentioned, Jack Smith's just the 10 years they had together of just, we're so happy, and she got to travel and do so many things, so it was really a great partnership. Thank you.
We now will be presenting a interview that we did of Doris Walker about a year ago. The Dana Point Historical Society is filming a documentary of Dana Point, and in it we have interviewed many of you that are here tonight, and Doris as well. We had planned a second interview with her closer towards the end of the production, which we are getting close to. We hope to have the film out by mid next year. So what we're about to see is this interview of Doris talking about Dana Point. All the people that we try to put together is why Dana Point? Why is Dana Point the way it is? How did it turn out to be this beautiful city that we've come to love and live in?
I started writing for publication at the age of 8. I created a newsletter at my elementary school and wrote it and distributed it myself from door to classroom to classroom. And that was always the thing that people would comment on that I did, and I got to be the person that would write, things for the newspaper and so forth. And, when you find your thing, you just keep doing it. I think the history part came when I arrived in California and had the feeling not only of the beautiful climate, but the multicultural history. And I had studied Russian and French, and the Russian aspect was really interesting to me, and the Spanish. And so that part of it I thought there was so much history to tell. In this particular area, it hadn't been written. Had I stayed in the Brentwood, Santa Monica area, I probably wouldn't have, because they already had all those books, so it's a matter of time, place, and what you decide to do. First of all, the tract that we purchased in, at that time, developers only had to put one tree on a lot, so there was no landscaping. And there was a ocean view. It was, as I said, before the harbor, and there were about 5,000 people living in Dana Point. And I began, you meet them at grocery stores and things, and you realize you need some friends. And I would talk to them, and I realized they didn't know why it was called Dana Point, And so that stimulated me, and when I did more reading about Richard Henry Dana and realized he was an author, and that was something I was beginning to bud in. And it just was a natural thing for me. What kind of writer? Well, he was, we call it, he said this was the only romantic spot in California. I think he was a romantic writer. Most of the sea stories you hear or read are kind of tough guy writers. And he was not. He was a lowly seaman, and he was not really a writer by training. And he talked about his feelings and how things affected him. And I think that was a very moving way to do it, and why his book has lasted through the centuries. And so I got the chance to do the research and write the history, and it was a wonderful feeling. And my children helped. I tried to relive some of that before the harbor was built, and then watched it excitedly in all its stages of being built, because by then I had 2 little sons, and they were typical boy motor vehicles, and so, and they watched that construction, the breakwater trucks that dominated the scene on the Coast Highway for years, and then the dredging and the construction in the dry of land vehicles, and we sat at the top of the cliffs there or at the gazebo and watched it all. And I took photographs of it all, which is why I had them available when I did my book, Homeport for Romance. I had friends who came here, bought a house. They were not my friends until they got here, so they didn't know me. They bought a house in Dana Point, settled into it, and one day they went for a walk and saw the harbor coming in. They didn't know that was there, and I think the harbor has gotten this into a lot of places that it might not have happened. It would just be another coastal town. And the boaters come mostly from out of this area, and they carry the story, you know, oh, I have my boat in this gorgeous place, you know. So we really don't need a lot of promotion of this spot itself anymore. When the harbor was almost completed, no boats yet, the Dana Point Harbor Lessees Association hired me to do PR. And my whole job really was to start letting people know what was coming and where we were. And that was one reason that we did the Festival of Whales, to just say that it was a pretty place with restaurants and shops. You know, there were several of those. And of course, having the two boys gave me a chance to use them as models. They still smile at that, and they say, gee, you know, here we were the greeters to the Dana statue and various things. In fact, I used to, they both went to Richard Henry Dana School, and something was going to happen, for instance, the statue arriving, and I would call the principal there and tell him and say, can I take some students with me? And he quickly said, you know, my two were the first two, and then maybe four more, whoever fit in the station wagon. And he would quick call their parents and say, Doris Walker has an adventure for your son, can he go? You know. So I would take maybe 6 boys down for these things that happened. Well, let me tell you about my 2 sons that grew up here. They told me that when we would go camping or a trip out of the area, and you'd get together with people at a campfire or something, and everybody would say where they're from, and they would say Dana Point. Where? You know, nobody heard what it was. When the harbor opened in 1971, and I think they were then in college, or at least in high school, and people would say the same thing, and they'd say, oh, that's where those nice restaurants are. Well, in their later life, they've told me that when they mention Dana Point, people say, boy, your parents must have been rich to have raised them here, you know, in the 60s and 70s. But they're very loyal to Dana Point. They'll always feel proud that they had this as their home base, and they'd often say to me, Mom, thanks for coming to California and Dana Point before you had us. I wrote stories for my sons when they were young. They really didn't know whether it was a library book or whether it was something I was writing. You know, it was hard for them. But one of them is an author now, a movie historian. He wanted to make movies when he was a little kid. He was turned on by black and white movies. Everything was color at that time. And he saw things on television that were movies that were black and white, and he wanted to make black and white movies. Isn't that a switch? And I've started to write put together children's books because I have a granddaughter who says, Grandma, you mean you've written books that aren't books yet? And one of the projects I'm working on now, which people always ask, is the tall ship history in this area, in Southern California. There's so little published about it. It's all New England and the East Coast, and part of it is because of the language barrier, the Spanish ships, you know. But I'm looking forward to finishing that. But it's a comfortable place for me because I've been here, I've seen the change, and people say, what do you think of it, how it's changed? And I said, well, that's what history is. If it had never changed, what would I write about? Well, they came to know that if there was something they wanted preserved in history, they should tell me, like I was going to live forever, you know. But that's the nice thing, when you write, you don't have to live forever. You've already said it.
I think you can see by the number that are here tonight the impact that Doris had in our lives. And just by speaking tonight, we can take that home with us. I hope each one of you received a bookmarker of Doris, since she was an author, and you'll see that last line that she said. That's what history is. If it never changed, what would I write about? So I hope you please take this. Now for Jack, I have Greg Sykes, who was with Jack in San Juan Capistrano and knew him as a resident there. Colonel Joe Snyder will be talking on Marine experience of Jack. And then Mike Smith, Jack's nephew, will conclude.
Thank you, Carlos. My name is Carlos, it is Greg Sykes, and I knew Jack as his Sun Ranch neighbor for the past 30 years. I can't remember the first time I met Jack, but I'm pretty sure it was during one of his daily walks. Jack had an extremely friendly and outgoing personality. He was always interested in the many home improvement projects taking place in our neighborhood. Jack had an answer for everything and was willing to unselfishly share his knowledge with everyone. He developed a successful retirement trade by building patio covers, decks, and room additions in the area. The neighbors would often say that the house would probably fall down way before any patio cover that Jack built. When it came time for us to build onto our house, there was no question we were going to use Jack. We knew Jack would do a great job and the price would be fair. We were looking forward to having it completed in a few months because Marie, my wife, was pregnant with our second child. Jack got off to a great start. The footings were dug, the foundations were poured. The framing was started, and the installation of the electrical wiring began. That was Jack's favorite part. My dad, who was also a licensed contractor, happened to visit while Jack was installing that electrical wiring. I was very proud to show him what a terrific job Jack was doing and what a great contractor I had selected. This just happened to be a day when Jack was connecting wire. While talking about the job, I asked Jack if the wiring was hot. He said, "Oh yes," with confidence. "I connect it hot all the time and I never get shocked." Just as he grabbed another wire to pull it through a connection, he jerked backwards and landed on a seat against the concrete. I looked over at my dad and could see the look on his face. My dad didn't say a word, but that look said everything. All Jack said was, "Wow, that was a good one." And I'm thinking, this is really going well. Several months into the job, our project began to slow down. We had a plastic sheet wall protecting the back of the house, and my wife Marie was about to have that new baby and a lot of anxiety because the room wasn't finished. Jack had several jobs going, so he was extremely busy. The challenge was to make our house his highest priority. So Marie began to invite him for breakfast every morning, and that got us back on schedule. She would have me call the night before and extend that breakfast invitation. That worked quite well, and we were done just before our son Eric arrived. Jack had the tools for everything. He would often come by and often offer to share a very expensive concrete jackhammer or some other special or expensive tool that I needed to complete some little job I was doing around the house. As I mentioned, he was a very unselfish person. Eventually, Jack began to borrow my tools as if, when he couldn't find his. If I couldn't find my tool, I knew where it was, and I would head out to track Jack down. I would bet a lot of you have one or two dog stories about Jack. One of Jack's loves was dogs, and one of his favorite dogs was our golden retriever, Copper. Copper and Jack were a really good neighborhood match. Copper loved to walk with Jack and visit all the neighbors. It became a daily routine for Jack to come knocking on our door to take Copper for a walk. Copper could recognize the sound of Jack's car long before he parked it in front of the house. Copper would run to the front room and sit patiently at attention by the front door, wagging his tail in anticipation of the evening outing. It got to the point that when we walked Copper, he would only want to take the route that Jack took him on. Copper even knew where Jack lived and would beeline for the front of his driveway. This routine went on for years. Jack had a favorite game he played with Copper, hide the treats. Jack would put a treat in his car and park his car somewhere else and tell Copper to go find it. Copper never disappointed Jack. He could find Jack's car even if it was around the block. Copper and Jack were good buddies, and Jack would often say he had all the fun of owning a great dog without the headaches. We didn't see as much of Jack after Copper passed away until one afternoon a couple years ago. A familiar face came up to the door to introduce me to a new friend. I could see immediately this person was a very important part of Jack's life. He looked the happiest I'd seen him in a long time as he introduced me to Doris Walker, whom he had just married. Both Doris and Jack were brimming with enthusiasm for each other, and Jack wanted to show her where Copper had lived and share some stories about Copper, one of his favorite companions. There are several things I'll always remember with respect about Jack. Our room addition still stands as a tribute to Jack's quality work. Many of our neighbors know each other primarily because of Jack's introductions. And although Jack is no longer with us, he will always be remembered for his thoughtfulness and unselfishness in the things he did for so many people. Thanks, Jack.
Good evening. Jack Pearson Smith was a United States Marine. He started his military service very early in life. He was a student at Oregon State University, and in 1951, when he went to college, he joined the ROTC. He participated in the ROTC as a platoon leader up until his graduation in 1954. And then he did what any sensible young man would do after graduating from college, seek an adventure. He went and joined the United States Marines. He served in the Marine Corps from 1954 to 1974, 20-year career. He served 2 tours in Vietnam as a loadmaster for C-130 military cargo planes. At Camp Pendleton, he was a logistics officer for the 1st Marine Division and served under the infamous General Kerr, who had been a classmate at Oregon State. He rose through the ranks to the rank of major, and he retired as Major Smith in 1974. We don't know his awards and decorations, but being a Vietnam vet, we are sure there are many, and others in addition to those. To have served for 20 years and retired in the grade of major is a commendable accomplishment. Jack's name will be engraved on our perpetual plaque at the Veterans Memorial here in Dana Point. We are proud of Major Smith's service to his country and to his Corps. He will be honored and revered by his friends and family for many, many years to come. May you have fair winds and following seas, dear comrade, on your journey through eternity. Farewell, and Semper Fidelis.
Wow, such good words. You know, as the last speaker coming up here, you hope everybody before you is really good, but not awesome. And I think that you all said such good things tonight, and I'm so honored to be a part of this and just to see so many people not only mourning the loss of my Uncle Jack and Doris, but smiling and sharing memories. And, as I thought about what I was going to say tonight, I kept drifting back to, I guess about 3 weeks ago, maybe a few weeks more, just about a week before they passed. My dad and I had come up and decided to rent a beach house and spend time with Doris and Jack. And we really had some great memories. Daisy, she was so proud of you and what you've become. And I spent time with Doris while my dad and Jack visited and reminisced about school and Vietnam and the war. And, something I decided to do tonight, kind of to honor both of them, is as Doris and I sat there and entertained ourselves while the boys, told boy stories and went back to high school, Doris made a comment that had me chuckling for the rest of the day. She said, your Uncle Jack was like a brilliant Forrest Gump, meaning that he was brilliant, but he had adventures in life. He had more adventures in his life than maybe 20 of us here together, just all packed in. And we started talking about his life and the fact that his life should be written into a book. And then we started talking about, what would the chapters be? And as I reminisced and thought about tonight, I wrote a few of those down, and I thought I would just share some of the thoughts about my uncle so that you know a little bit more about him, maybe more than you know or knew before you came in. But, his life started with the first chapter, which I would call the bomb. I don't know if a lot of you knew this, but Lott, Texas was not a town with much hope or much opportunity, but the atomic bomb is actually what led Jack to Pendleton. You see in the program here that he went to Pendleton, but you don't know why. It was because of the atomic bomb. And his father actually worked on the factory where that was being built, where some of that technology was being developed, and that's actually what got him to Oregon. And from there, he grew up in Pendleton, and he went to Oregon State. And I really think he had three goals there. One was to continue in his ROTC training. Another was to obviously graduate, but the third, and probably what he had the most fun with, actually beating the shirts off his buddy's back playing poker. And if you've ever sat down with him at a poker table, it was probably the last time you did it, if you were very smart at all. A story I heard recently was that my dad, who's sitting here in the front row, was playing poker with him, and if you ever played poker with my dad, he's the kind of guy you wanted to play poker with. He's a guy you could win with, but you just couldn't beat Jack. And my dad had looked at his shirt and admired a shirt of a buddy playing poker across the room and said, "Man, that's a great shirt. I love that green shirt." And he lost early, which was the norm. And went home. About 3 hours later, my Uncle Jack showed up with all his winnings and the green shirt. He had literally won the shirt off the guy's back, and that's what he was all about. From college, obviously, as you've heard, he joined the Marines. And we could talk about that forever. If you knew Jack, he had great stories. Great stories, but the one that sticks out in my mind that says a lot about his character was the fact that he looked over and saw, and Colonel, I apologize, you probably aren't going to approve of this, but there were several water trucks allotted to be sent home. And he had asked the person that was in charge of those water trucks, "Well, why don't you give me one of the water tanks for the orphanage next door?" This is in Vietnam. And after being told twice, he gave them opportunity to give him the tank. At midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, he took several of his boys over with welders. They took the tank, and he drove a crane over and lifted the tank into the orphanage. And the very next day, the orphans had a tank. So it was things like that just amazed me. He thought was with his heart, and when he put his mind to it, he gave you an opportunity to say yes, but if you didn't, well, he made it happen anyways. We talked about another chapter being Jack's life as a dog, and the fact that he actually, I think at least my dog thought Jack was just another dog. He'd get on the floor and bark with her. He had to wrestle with her. Bella was convinced that he was just one of the pack, and I know, with your family's dog, he was very close to some of the dogs you had, and I think that was one of the greatest joys of his life. He told me that while overseas, he fell in love with a dog while serving on a base that he was not allowed to bring home, and when he was told he couldn't bring the dog home, he ran over to the air base and got close to somebody really quick, and made sure this dog got on a plane eventually. When he got back to the States, he was crushed to find out that the dog was not where it was supposed to be, and he spent quite a bit of time tracking down the dog and found it in New York. The dog was so close to his heart that he traveled to New York and got the dog and brought it home. So just what an amazing guy, and dogs were the light of his life, and if you knew him as a builder, you know that he did beautiful work, and he was sought after, and he took pride in what he did. Kim made a comment tonight that really made me laugh. She said, "I never thought you could have too many electrical outlets in a garage." And the fact is, when he was building an add-on for, I believe, Kim's in-laws, Kevin's in-laws, his son's in-laws, there was a time when they were waiting for permits, and I believe he was a little bored. So he proved Kim wrong and put an outlet every 4 feet, including the ceiling. So he was all about not only doing it right, but doing it over and over again. Just an amazing guy. And I'll be quick about this, but I think the last chapter in his book is the greatest. And I call that The Greatest Adventure. On June 18th, 2000, I got married to my wife, Abby, and I met Doris Walker. She came to our wedding, and as we were walking around greeting everybody, I got to the table, and at a wedding, there's times when there's some awkward moments when people are sitting at a table and they don't know each other. Doris had her table and 2 tables over captivated with her stories, and what I remember most about that is for the first time in my life, I remember looking at my Uncle Jack and saying, wow, he is so content, and he is so happy. And I was so proud that Doris came into our life and was such a special part of my Uncle Jack's life. The adventures they had, traveling on military transports all over the world. What a way to live. And I do remember picking them up at Miramar a few times and seeing Marines lined up on the tarmac to give Doris a hug and to shake Uncle Jack's hand. Here these guys were coming back from deployment. You'd think the first thing they want to do is go home. They were talking to Doris and Jack, which I think is a testament of what incredible people they were. You couldn't get enough of them. And I know that he was so proud of you, Kim, and the fact that you were, you got your commission as an officer. Abby and I had a lunch just before they passed. We went up and spent a whole day with them just sipping coffee, and he must have shared that with me 3 times, just how proud he was of you and what you've done with your life. And in closing, I'd just like to say for all of you that call Jack and Doris friend, neighbor, brother, sister, aunt, grandma, weren't we lucky?
Now, from the city of Dana Point, I'd like to introduce our mayor, J. Scott Schofield. He will also be addressing, I kind of put this all together, so the city, the county, and the state. That's the impact, how far Doris reached. And Scott will be addressing those areas.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you all for coming tonight. Doris Walker Smith was about as perfect a citizen as any city, county, or state is ever likely to claim as its own. Through her many notable personal and professional achievements, Doris set a standard of excellence that many of us may try to match, but likely few of us will ever succeed in that effort. In every project she so zealously undertook, I believe Doris really tried to make our community and our region a better place to live, work, learn, and play, and she did magnificently, and we're grateful for that. Like most great citizens, Doris was also an outstanding motivator and mobilizer of people for the public good. Many have spoken this evening of her vital roles in not only recording and reporting Dana Point's history, but helping shape it as well. Our community's well-being has always depended, in large measure, on the generous contributions of our volunteers. Doris was always willing to donate her time and abundant talent to lead and assist these efforts when it was needed most, and we are grateful for that as well. In my view, Doris's most noteworthy contribution to our civic and governmental affairs was her, quote, unofficial role as Dana Point's gentle but most insistent advocate. Doris was fiercely proud of her home port and was a tireless and ardent cheerleader for her city, county, and state. This she accomplished with an infectious and irresistible mix of wit, humility, graciousness, and lots and lots and lots of love. I'm going to give Doris the last word here because nothing I can say tonight could sum up Doris's amazing impact on this city as well as our lives, as well as her own words to me written just over 2 months ago. First, some background. Julie and I hosted our annual summer soiree on September 11th, 2011, a very special date and a very special event for all those in attendance. As I dragged myself through work the next morning and prepared for a city council meeting that evening, I checked my city email, and one message stood clearly out from the rest of the subject line that shouted in all caps, "Dana Point citizen sounds off." Ladies and gentlemen, when you encounter a subject line like that, I assure you the email that follows is quite often a long, highly expressive tome, chock full of constructive criticism on how to be a better elected official. I was so distracted by the purple headline, I failed to notice who sent it. I braced myself and dug into its contents. And they were. Started off with a newspaper clipping from Ohio. And the headline was, "Ohio Woman Hauls Trash to Mayor's Office." Associated Press, Portsmouth, Ohio. An Ohio woman, frustrated by the mix-up of the trash pickup schedule after the Labor Day holiday, decided to haul her own garbage right into her mayor's office. Janice Shanks carried 2 bags of refuse into Portsmouth Mayor David Malone's office on Friday morning. Shanks said she had more garbage than normal because of a holiday family get-together, and the lack of collection put her in a real pickle. Malone accepted the trash, says he will take it to the city's waste disposal department. Malone says certain routes were skipped so the city could avoid paying overtime for the holiday work. He says there was confusion over how notice was sent out to the residents. By now, I was even more convinced that this email was not heading toward a good place. Then I noticed who sent it. homeports@aol.com. Dear Mr. Dana Point Mayor, instead of trash, this former Ohio woman would love to pelt your office and yard with the finest array of the most deliciously scented flowers available. Your party was all out wonderful. The guests were a fine assortment of our wonderfully diverse community. The food was superb, but the dessert was the epitome. The music, it took me back to the days when I opened my doors to my 2 sons' bands for practices and even performances, accompanied by a modest spaghetti and salad dinner. Of course, we had to keep the doors and windows shut and survive in summer with floor fans. And Dana Point wasn't even a city then. Your array of musical talent was amazing and so enjoyable. I can't decide who I enjoyed the most, the kids with the tiny violins or the mayor with his marvelous misshapen model. You were all top-deck performers, and wow about the national anthem. My applause could not match your volume, but it was echoed by my awesome internal appreciation of being invited to share a memorable day. Thanks to you and Julie. But wait, there's more. P.S. Send me Jared's D.C. address and I will mail him a home port for romance. It doesn't match your music, but it seems will hang around for whenever he wants a break from his scholastic studies, or when a classmate simply asks, just what and where is your hometown?
I'd like to thank Beacon Printing for helping us with our program, for Real-Time Sight and Sound of San Juan, formerly of Dana Point, for the video equipment to show her clip. And I wanted to read from Doris's book, Home Port from Romance. This is the history, romance, of Capistrano Bay, told by one local adventurer who has lived it through research, experience, and imagination. Doris Walker, Dana Point, California, May 1981. Now we'll hear from Kirk Lindahl, Bishop of the Capistrano First Ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for our benediction.
Our Father in heaven, we come before thee this night and give thee thanks for this great occasion. We're thankful for Doris and Jack, for their great spirits, for their lives, and for their love for each of us. We pray, Father, that thou will be with each of us, that we may remember them, take them to heart, and the things that they did for us, and remember their legacy, that we may share that with those around us. We're thankful for their great spirits, and they're thankful for the place that they are residing in. We pray, Father, that thou will bless us all, that we may all live our lives so that we may be with them again, and that we may have those joys that we have shared with them many times. We're thankful for this day, for this evening, for this opportunity to represent and honor them this night. We give thanks for their lives, enjoying their happiness at this time, and do so in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.